Yo, what's going on everybody? My name is Ryan. I am a CPA and today I'm going to be talking about whether or not you should be putting your real estate investment properties into an S corporation. And before I do that, I would love it if you would please smash the like button and you'll see if you'll find this video helpful. And if you do, smash the like button. If you're new here, please do consider subscribing to my channel. I'd really appreciate that. I'm putting out a lot of content, free content on tax-related matters, business-related matters, and the government's CARES Act, all the programs that are available right now to help businesses and individuals. So before we continue, I want to address why you would even want to consider putting things in S Corp. Okay, so as an S corporation, well, actually as a business owner, you usually pay self-employment tax and income tax on your income. Okay, so self-employment tax is 15%, which is pretty significant. And then you add that to income tax, which could range from 10% to 39% for federal, and then whatever your state is as well. So it could get pretty high up there, right? So people, when you own an S corporation, you actually eliminate your self-employment tax altogether. The 15%. The problem is, as an S Corp owner, you are required to pay yourself a reasonable salary. So your business has to pay you a W-2 wage. And that's where the IRS gets to collect their self-employment tax through payroll taxes. But in the end, it's still more beneficial typically for business owners to operate as an S corporation, as long as it's like a small business and a closely held group. Now, what does that mean? A closely held group means it's maybe one, maybe two owners, and that's it. That's how it works best. And if the business doesn't intend on getting funding through investors, that's another good reason to not do an S Corp, because the S Corp's ownership are limited to just people, and they have to be domestic here in the US. That means that businesses can't own shares in S Corp, and it also means that foreign people can't own shares in the S Corp. So S Corps are really limited. They're for like very small businesses, individual owners only, maybe a husband and wife owner is recommended. I would not recommend it for every business. I wouldn't just blanketly say you should do an S Corp. It really depends on your business, on who's the ownership structure, on what the ownership structure looks like, and if you intend on getting investors and all that stuff. So in this video, we're going to assume, if we recommend to put it in an S Corp, we're going to assume that all those things, all those conditions are okay, and you're okay with, not being able to get investors. You're okay with just being the sole owner of the S Corp or whatever it is. We're going to assume all those conditions are met. So that's why we're talking about this with real estate. We get questions a lot on whether or not you should be putting real estate in an S Corp. So before we start, also, I want to go over the different types of real estate investments. First, there are long-term rentals, which you have a residential property, you lease it out for a year to like one tenant, and that's a long-term rental. Then you have short-term rentals, which are more like Airbnbs, like typical Airbnbs, where you have like a vacation home or something in the city, and people just come and rent it out for a week, maybe a few days, something like that. That is the short-term rental. Then you have bed and breakfasts, which are kind of like Airbnbs, but you also provide substantial services, and I'll talk about that later. And then I'm going to talk about fix and flips, which basically means you buy property, you fix it up, and then you resell it at a higher price, or you just buy property and then resell it at a higher price. In terms of real estate, I want to consider also wholesaling, but I will just lump that in with fix and flips, okay? Because they're different, I understand, but the tax treatment is similar. All right, so to start with long-term rentals, should you put long-term rentals in an S Corp? And I would say the answer is no, you shouldn't, because long-term rentals do not generate self-employment tax. Long-term rentals just are rental income, they're passive income. So you don't have to worry about the self-employment tax issue. Therefore, if you were to put it in an S Corp, or an LLC, or not put it into any entity at all, it makes zero difference on your taxes, except how you file them. But you won't be paying less taxes doing it one way compared to the other. Now, why wouldn't you want to put in an S Corp anyway? Well, if you can put an LLC, I think LLCs are better legally for businesses. Like there's fewer corporate formalities that you have to follow. There's just fewer regulations you have to follow. LLCs are just better. So that's why I would put in an LLC if there's no self-employment issue. Now, if you put it in a corporation, like an S corporation, then you actually are at a disadvantage compared to an LLC. So what's the disadvantage? Have you heard of the step up in basis when you pass away or when you inherit a property? Well, when it's in an LLC, when the real estate is in an LLC, you do get the step up in basis if you were to pass away and somebody inherits your property. And I'm not going to go into detail what that means. It's just a big tax advantage for inherited property. If you have a property in an S corporation, there is no step up in basis. That means when somebody inherits your property, they inherit your basis. So when they go to sell the property, they're going to have major capital gains, most likely, since real estate is an appreciating asset. So probably to go into more depths about inherited property and stepped up basis in a different video, but not today. Just know that it is a big disadvantage to not have a stepped up basis. Okay, the next thing I'm going to talk about are Airbnb rentals, short-term rentals. So, similar thing to long-term rentals, this is not a self-employment income. This is still passive income. It's not going to generate self-employment taxes. So my recommendations here go along with the long-term rentals. Now, there are going to be some CPAs that say that Airbnb should be considered self-employment tax, but I think they might be confusing Airbnbs to bed and breakfasts, which I'll go over next. Okay, Airbnb short-term rentals, in the traditional sense where people are just renting your house from you or your room from you for a few days and then they take off. That's not really a bed and breakfast. So my recommendations here fall in line with the long-term rentals. Now, what's the difference between a short-term rental and a bed and breakfast? A bed and breakfast is like a business that you operate out of the property. The business being you rent a room and then maybe your guest stays there for a week, right? So it's similar to short-term rental that way. But during that time, maybe when the guest leaves for the day to do their vacation stuff, maybe you go into the room and you clean the room, or maybe you give them breakfast in the morning and lunch and dinner. You provide meals for them. Maybe you provide some other concierge service for them. You like arranging a taxi or Uber for them to go travel, or arranging transportation. This is what's considered substantial services, where you're cleaning the rooms, you're providing meals, you're providing concierge services. That is what makes it different, from an Airbnb or a short-term rental. Bed and breakfasts are considered self-employment income, and therefore, putting them into an S corporation could be beneficial here. Now, there's one way to do it where you get the best of both worlds, where you can get the stepped up basis on your property and avoid the self-employment tax by putting in an S Corp. So usually my recommendations here are putting the actual property, the ownership of the property should be owned by just an LLC, a separate LLC that is not your bed and breakfast. Then I would put your bed and breakfast operations into an LLC taxed as an S Corp. And therefore you save on the self-employment tax of the bed and breakfast income, and you're paying rent to your other LLC, which owns the property. This way your property is separated from your business income, and your property can still get a stepped up basis if you were to pass and somebody inherits the property. All right, the last thing I'm going to talk about are fix and flips / wholesaling properties. So like I said before, fix and flips mean you purchase a property that is really haggard and run down, and it needs a facelift. It needs some significant remodeling. You buy a property, you remodel it, and you sell it for a profit at a higher price. You usually don't hang on to the property more than a few months. Ideally less than that. If you're wholesaling, you might be hanging on to it for a few days. So really a stepped up basis is not a concern here, because your goal isn't to hang on the property for a long time, okay? If you're hanging on the property for just a few months maximum, your purchase price and selling price of the property your basis and selling price, they're not going to be too different where it's going to be very significant if you were to pass, during the time that you held on to a property. So fix and flips and wholesaling is considered self-employment income, and therefore, if you were to put this business into an S Corp, you would save on the self-employment tax. Okay. Now again, assuming that you're okay with being like maybe a close group owner and you're okay with paying yourself a salary, then yes, this would be probably a good idea. And again, like I said, since there are no concerns about holding on to property for a long time, your concerns about the basis of the property when you pass away is very, very minimal. So yeah, in this instance, I would say it's worth it to put your business in an S Corp. Now, before I end the video, I just want to make sure that I let you know that this is just my opinions. And before you go doing anything, please consult with your actual tax professional and your actual tax advisor. I am not trying to give you tax advice right now. These are just my opinions that I'm sharing with you as my viewers. Definitely seek professional tax advice before you make any moves. Feel free to contact us if you want, all right? But don't just go off of any random YouTube video that you see on YouTube, including mine, all right? So that's all I got for today. Thanks for watching. Again, if you found this video helpful, please smash the like button. And if you're new here, I would love it if you consider subscribing to my channel. And yeah, that's all I got. Stay safe out there and take care.
I'm in the mood for a switch up. I hit the function, hit the rose till I hiccup. I hit the stage and leave with money that's a sticker. She picture perfect, so I told him I'm a